Welcome to another edition of Real Life Renos, the podcast. My name is Karen Brown. I'm your host as always, and for those who are joining us for the first time, I'm an aging in place and accessibility strategist. Today, we are pleased to welcome back one of our favorite guests, who is an architect specializing in barrier-free design, Mr. Ron Wickman. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks. It's great to be here again.
Today, we are all about ramps. Getting in and out of the
Sounds good.
house. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just start with basically what is a ramp and why would somebody want it?
Yeah, a ramp, I think most people would understand a ramp as being this wooden pathway on an incline, and it would lead up to and over the front steps of a door. So if you're a layperson and somebody out there in the public that doesn't have a lot of experience with ramps, this is what you might commonly see. You might have been involved in helping provide a ramp for neighbors or family or friends. And so a ramp is this inclined pathway. By definition, though, in terms of a building code, a ramp is considered something that is more than or steeper than a 1 in 20 incline. And that incline can, by building code, can never get steeper than 1 in 12.
So let's explain what that means. Let's just take 1
Right,
in 12,
right.
break that down for
So,
us.
so 1 in 12 essentially means that for every, uh, I'm going to use feet and inches. Sorry for people that are, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. You can use metric too, but I'm just used to using feet and inches. So for every foot you go up vertically, you go 12 feet out. So it's a 1 to 12 ratio. So for, let's say, every meter you go up, you would go 12 meters out.
I
So
I think the building
um,
trade uses feet and inches
they, the
pretty
residential
much.
building trades usually use feet and inches, and then
Yeah.
government buildings are typically metric. So
Okay.
I'm just used to speaking in an imperial and understanding it better in imperial. But yeah, that's essentially it. A 1 in 12 ratio. So 1 part up, 12 parts across.
So if a person
So
has a porch that is 3 steps from the ground level to the porch, how would they go about this? They'd measure that, and that would be roughly what, 22
yeah,
inches?
so about
Yeah,
24 inches
24. Okay.
or 2 feet. So 2 feet is 600 millimeters. You would go out 24 feet. So, so imagine, if you will, your house is 4 feet above the ground, your main floor. That means you would need at least 48 feet of ramp. And not very many people have front yards that can accommodate such a ramp. Uh, and especially just like one straight long run. There's some other subtle issues around ramps. You can't go more than 30 feet without having to have some sort of landing as well. So often you do like maybe a switchback ramp where you do a 90-degree turn or a 180-degree turn. So all of this just tends to fill up your yard. So one thing I was going to say about that is in my time, and I've been at this in practice for almost 30 years now, and having grown up with a father in a wheelchair, at 59, I have 59 years old. I have 59 years of experience, and I can tell you, in those years, uh, when you drive through neighborhoods, certainly here in Edmonton and other parts of Alberta that I frequent, Calgary, Red Deer, you drive through neighborhoods. You're starting, and you just see more and more of these wooden ramps going up. And I would venture to guess that many of them, if not most of them, don't actually meet any kind of code. They're just sort of slapped together. I'm not even sure how structurally sound they often are. But desperation requires desperate acts, and you rely on friends to get these things done, handymen to get these things done. Often you don't go to a certified contractor or structural engineer or anything like that. You just kind of get these things up, and they're primarily, they look like they're temporary, and they are often very temporary.
A little
And
sketchy.
you just start, yeah, and you just start seeing more and more of them, which tells you that this is a serious issue, right? And again, for at least 30 years, I've been talking about our aging population, and how that's going to influence the way we build. And it hasn't really caught on in terms of making houses so that they're lower to the ground or don't even have steps at the front door. That's still not translating. So we're still in kind of renovation mode. And it's just really hard, especially nowadays when newer neighborhoods have small lots, smaller front yards. We're just not set up to allow for this adaptability.
I can tell you that one of the most frequent calls that I get and that I know my colleagues get is from people whose loved one is in rehab. They've had a car accident, they've had a workplace accident, whatever the case is. They can't come home from rehab until they can get in and out of the house and have a washroom that they can access and use independently. So I think that probably gives birth to a lot of these sketchy ramp structures that all of us see from time to time. It's not necessarily the best case scenario because it's part of what you and I have talked about all along is planning ahead.
Hmm.
Plan for your old age. I know you can't plan for a workplace accident and you can't plan for a car crash, but if we plan to build houses that were more accessible for all people, this would have solved some of these problems.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it is twofold. A very common issue for me that I get involved with is exactly what you're talking about. Somebody's been injured, maybe through a work injury or a car accident or a fall, and a ramp is just necessary. And again, more often than not, people will just build something in wood. Uh, there are companies out there that provide temporary metal ramps. They can be used in a residential context, like a single family house, or they're often used in temporary situations where you might have like a big auditorium with a stage, and you have people with disabilities that need to get up on that stage. So they'll build this temporary ramp to get up there, and then they're demountable and can be put away and used at another time. So you see those as well, those metal ramps.
So, what is the typical material? If you were contracted to design a ramp, what materials would you specify typically?
I well, I have my own kind of theory, I guess, or concept of building ramps and relating to the costs of ramps. Um, I think I would typically go and try to build with concrete, like a concrete sidewalk or a concrete ramp, if we're talking about an elevation change of less 2 feet or less. So concrete is by far the most durable material to build your ramps with. You can do a kind of a rough textured surface, or we call it a broom finish, which is your most common finish. It's got some grip to it. You add the handrails, and it's easy to maintain. In the wintertime, when you get snow and ice, it's easy to chip away the ice or put salt down, sand down on the concrete. Uh, the concrete starts to get a bit more expensive if you get into distances that are more than the 2 foot vertical rise. So a ramp that's more than 24 feet, for example, uh, then a wood ramp or a metal ramp start to become less expensive or more economical to build.
And can we
And
just touch on
yeah,
what those costs would be? So, a 2 foot concrete ramp.
Yeah, concrete ramp, you have to, with a concrete ramp, typically you'd have to build up the earth. So there's some work there. You build up a bit of a hill, and then you pour a concrete. Basically, you pour a concrete sidewalk on the hill, right? So
Right.
there's work to be done with with all of that. Uh, I often use about $150 a running foot for that. So that would include your metal handrails or your wooden handrails as well. Um, that it varies very much, probably with regions and contractors and so on. But often I use that to kind of help my clients understand that that's what we're talking about.
So for our
And then of
listeners,
course,
let's understand that we're recording this in February of 2024. So
right,
the
yeah,
costs that we're talking about here are what we know to be true now in the
more or
now
less now.
version.
That's yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, for sure, because it was a lot cheaper 20 years ago, and it's probably going to be more expensive 10 years from now.
Right.
um,
Right.
so yeah, the concrete is also, pretty durable. You can, some people try to do the pavers, but again, in this part of the world where we get a lot of movement in our earth, the pavers can start to buckle a bit, and then that just becomes a horrendous surface to try to wheel on. Even worse if you're using a cane or a walker. Um, so yeah, that's not generally a good idea.
Yeah. Can we say,
And
can we go so far as to say we don't recommend that?
yeah, highly don't
Highly.
recommend it.
Right.
The wood ramp, it varies too. Like you can do a bit more of a temporary wood ramp where there's really no kind of foundation for it just sits on the ground. So the ramp would kind of, and again, we're not talking about huge movement, but there would be some movement as the earth freezes and thaws. A ramp that just sits on the ground, made of wood, again, is probably in that 150 a dollar per running foot. That's like full on handrails and so on. Um, maybe $100 a running foot for something without any kind of foundation work, like concrete piles, sort of tying it to the house itself, so it just doesn't go anywhere, um, and you get no movement at all, which allows the ramp to also um, always maintain its being flush with the door threshold too that you're entering in. So a ramp that can move might drop by an inch or so, and then that could create a real problem getting in and out of the house.
Right. And
Now, sorry, just having
go
said
ahead.
that, when you get into concrete and you start getting into a 36-foot long concrete sidewalk or even more, then the costs start to escalate quite a bit, right? So you don't use that $150 dollars anymore. It's so much more earthwork. It's hard to tamp that earth and create a surface that won't sort of collapse, I guess, under the pressure of our freeze thaw, right? So
Right.
I would never recommend somebody doing a 36-foot or 48-foot long ramp in concrete, unless the landscape itself allowed for that. So, a
Right.
hill or something like that. But generally, you don't want to build these gigantic hills and then pour concrete on them.
Right. Now,
So yeah, the wood is better for longer distances.
and you've touched on railings. Railings are a necessity.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. So a ramp is defined again by something that is steeper than 1 in 20. That's by the building code. So 1 in 18, 1 in 15, 1 in 12, and then you can't get steeper than 1 in 12. So you have to have handrails on both sides of the ramp,
Right.
and the width of the ramp has to be at least 800 and now I'm talking in metric because the code is in metric all the time. 850 850 or 860 is the least you can have the ramp in terms of width. But most ramps are quite a bit wider. At least 3 feet. Or 900 millimeters or more. Like I usually make them at least 4 feet wide.
Right. Right. Well,
Yeah,
that's helpful if you've got a person accompanying you or perhaps a service dog that may need to be
correct. Yeah,
beside you for some
yeah,
reason.
yeah.
Um,
And let me just back up a little bit and share something with you that I think will help listeners as well with my own
sure.
experience. So my father built a wheelchair accessible house in 1967, and there was no code at all for accessibility. And this new house and the understanding of accessible architecture and all that was just really not well known. So the house was built. It was built 2 feet above the ground. Um, I think we've talked about this in previous podcasts when we talked about visitability, but essentially 2 feet. Again, just to quickly tell you again why most houses are at least 2 feet above the ground in Canada is because we build in wood and we want to keep the wood away from water. So usually our joists are at least 10, 12 inches, and then we need to be another 8 inches above the ground from there. So we're talking at least 20, 24 inches before we would actually get to the main floor. So that's kind of where the 2 feet comes from. I hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying that.
yeah. So this house was just built in that traditional way. It was a little 1,100 square foot bungalow, and my dad detached garage. My dad noticed that um, it was this 2 foot distance above the ground, and he was like, "Well, what are we going to do about that?" And the builder said, "Oh, yeah, I guess that's a problem, isn't it?" And so they just poured a ramp in 1967 that was essentially 1 in 6 steepness. So that's very, very steep. But I think that when the code first was proposed, 1 in 6 was kind of like the first dimension or first thought that people had. So my dad and this ramp led from the ground to the door threshold. So essentially, for almost 40 years of my dad's life, he used the rails to grip onto the rails and pull himself up, get to the front door, lock the brakes of his wheelchair, his manual wheelchair, and unlock the door, open the door, unlock his brakes, and wheel in. Imagine leaving the house was having to reach back on this incline as you try to reach back and grab the door handle and shut the door. And then he would hold on to the rails going down so that he didn't go too fast, and then make his way to the detached garage. So he had that for, again, almost 40 years of his life in a wheelchair, and about 3 or 4 years before he passed away, we redid that ramping situation, which was a little bit tricky. We had to do a 90-degree turn, but we were able to build the new ramp so that it was a 1 in 12 slope, and we also had a 5 foot by 5 foot, 1,500 millimeter by 1,500 millimeter level landing at the door itself. So once you're at the door, then you have a level area that you can kind of get yourself positioned, gain access to the door handle, and get in or get out, right? So when we do talk about ramps, we have to remember that there are these requirements for level areas at the top and bottom of the ramps as well,
Two
which
things come
just
to
again adds to space and cost.
two things come to mind. Number one, how relieved your father must have been with the new ramp when it was in place.
Hmm.
And secondly,
Yep.
his upper body strength must have been out of this world for all those
It
years.
it was. He had really good upper body strength. You're right, but he was also close to 60 when we switched out the ramp, and all those years of kind of abuse to his shoulders and pressure on his shoulders finally gave way, and that's why we had to do the ramp. He just couldn't make the house work anymore. And so, he was driving a car. He went to from that to driving a van because he just couldn't transfer anymore, getting in and out of his vehicle. He was actually using a bathtub. Imagine trying to transfer in and out of a bathtub if you're paralyzed from the waist down. And he just couldn't do it anymore. So all of this came because he was somebody with a disability who was also aging. So it's not just hard on those of us who are able-bodied as we age, but it's also becomes a big factor for uh, people who are disabled as well.
Right.
So it just kind of tells you that I've been around this a long time, and it's I'm not going to lie, it's a bit discouraging and disappointing that I still continue to drive through neighborhoods and see brand new houses being built, infill housing that is, highly promoted in this part of the world now, in all of Canada, this infill housing, and there are 4 or 5 more steps to the door. Brand new houses. We have an opportunity to do this right, and we just don't, and it's really sad to see. So then you just see these narrow lots now, taking a bigger lot and dividing it into two. You just can't get the ramps there anymore, right? They're just not going to
No.
work at all. So
No. Well,
it's
fortunately,
becoming.
there.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's just such a problem that we have talked about time and time and time again, that builders and developers continually say, we will build what the people want, but the
Yeah,
people don't know what to ask for. Can we just go back to code for a second? Because you've touched on that a
sure.
lot, and how code applies to residential versus commercial or public spaces.
Yeah, so there's sometimes a bit of a misconception about this, but the building code is primarily for all buildings, but primarily for buildings used by the public, right? It's to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of people who use the buildings, whether that be staff or visitors. The barrier-free design requirements within the building code are uh, part three of the building code. So part three is for public buildings. So when we talk about accessible washrooms, ramps, the need for ramps, these all relate to spaces primarily used by the general public. Uh, a single family house or anything up to a fourplex or smaller is considered residential in scope. And residential construction falls in Part 9 of the building code. And Part 9 has no barrier free design requirements. So I do often get into this situation where we do build a ramp, and the inspectors want that ramp to meet Part 3 of the building code. And we do make that meet Part 3 or better. Um, I have, though, found myself in situations where we've done a small deck and ramp off of a master bedroom, let's say. The bedroom used by the individual who uses a wheelchair has a disability, and that is primarily just used for emergency egress. So it's not a big deck that people enjoy themselves on. It's enough of a landing to get out of the house onto the deck, and then a ramp would get you out of the house. And I've tried to make that ramp steeper, maybe even 1 in 6 in terms of slope, thinking that it's only used for emergency egress. And I just don't want to take up a lot of space in somebody's yard unnecessarily. And that's where it's a bit of a hit and miss for me, frankly. So depending on the inspector, it's not clear, but the inspector has the ability to use their own discretion. So more often than not, they do ask that the ramp be made according to code. Even though I would argue it doesn't need to be. It's not something that's being used in that context.
Right.
Um, So it does get a little bit tricky, and this is a little bit beyond the ramps. But again, uh, I would certainly, I guess you can't hold me to this because again, it depends on who inspects your house. But if you were doing a bathroom and you needed grab bars in a certain place for your own disability and your own independence and safety, I would put those grab bars where you need them, not where the building code tells you they should be. I don't see the benefits of that. So in a private residence, I think you can make a strong argument that you're going to do what um, works for you as an individual,
Right.
and that is something that we get into a bit of a gray zone. It's interesting that way.
We do have some pictures that you sent to me of some various ramps, one that is the typical example that we see, and then some better alternatives. So, for our listeners who are listening to the audio version of the podcast, we will do our best to describe these images really, really well, but we will put them in the podcast notes. And for those who are watching the video version, then you will see it. So it's a little rough, yeah, in terms of showing the PowerPoint presentation, but we'll give it a go. There we go. There's the first one.
Yeah, so this image shows two houses in a mature neighborhood in Edmonton. I can't even remember exactly where it is, but it doesn't matter. Fairly common mature neighborhood. They're 50-foot wide lots. There's two bungalows. Each of the bungalows are a good 3 feet above the ground, the main floor. Um, and that again, another big issue for people in this part of the world is to try to get that main floor as high out of the ground as you can to give yourself as large window space in the basement as you can as well. Um, I would make an argument that we can just build bigger window wells and you still get your big windows in the basement. But conventional attitudes have always been, well, let's just raise the house up. That's the easiest thing to do, except for when you're in a wheelchair or have a disability. So these two ramps are, oh boy, a good 30, 36, 40, maybe even more feet each. They're switchback ramps. Basically, they take up the front yards of their respected front yards. They're both built out of wood. Um, Looks like they have concrete piles that they're sitting on, and they're I don't know. You might have your opinion, Karen, but I think they're quite unsightly. They don't give ramps a good a good name, and they certainly don't give a good feel for those of us promoting a better, more beautiful kind of accessible architecture.
I would agree with you. I find them to be quite ugly. And I think that in terms of people being nervous about how they might sell their house when the time came, they would be very nervous about that. But you need to live. So these are the ramp designs that they have chosen or have been proposed to them, but it's also the kind of ramp design that you, Ron, and I would see when we get these emergency calls from people that say, "Hey, I can't come home until something happens." That I can get into the house, right?
That's exactly it, and I think a lot of times people they just don't have the ability to easily move and find something else, and so they're in a tough spot, right? And this is often now we're seeing uh, seniors that don't have the assets to be able to go, well, fine, I'll sell my house and just build something new, or I'll move somewhere. If you're a bit more elderly, my mom is 81, for example, there's no way you're going to get her out of a community that she's been in since 1967. She wants to stay where she is. Now, she's lucky in a sense that her house was built to be wheelchair accessible. So she can do that. and maybe I should promote that more and show that as a good example of somebody being able to stay at home easily. But we don't all have that choice, right? That choice hasn't been presented to us, and we just don't have the income to be able to make it work in any other way than to kind of slap on a ramp in front of your house.
Right. Let's move on to the next one. There we go.
While we're at it too, I should mention that I'll send you some more photos. That there's a couple of examples that I can show you the alternative to the ramp, which is a mechanical porch lift. So if you think of, I can't do my math here, but if you're looking at a 24-foot long ramp, wooden ramp at, even $100 a running foot, that's 2,400. Am I right there? Yeah, $2,400. And if you start getting into longer ramps, of course, the numbers go up. So yeah, I always say a ramp is, you should budget at least, double what I just said, like at least 5,000 typically, unless it's a nice short ramp. You can get a porch lift, this mechanical porch lift that you can just add on to your front steps.
Right. So if
And
you send me
and
that
then
picture, I'll put it here, but I'll also
yeah,
put it back in the podcast that we did
yeah,
earlier.
like I
Where,
won't be able to send it to you right now, but yeah, you
yeah,
can just have it in for the podcast notes. But
yeah,
essentially, it's just something that sits beside. People might have seen it. This sort of funny looking thing that um, sits beside the front steps. There's all kinds of logistics to that as well. It's the lifts themselves though are about $7,000-8,000. That's just to supply and install a lift. Then you've got to add uh, add costs related to making a level area, maybe pouring a sidewalk to the entrance of the lift, modifying your steps. A lot of times means sort of kind of adding some structure onto your steps to make up. Usually your top landing of your step is about 4 inches below the door threshold. So all of that gives you something that probably ends up being about $10,000 at least, right? And they definitely do not look nice.
well, I will mention too that for those who might think of going that route and want to check into the option, I do see them come available secondhand from time to time. So the
And yeah,
cost of
that's
a
true. They do. Yeah.
the cost of a brand new one might be able to be mitigated by a little bit by finding something secondhand. So, but
Yeah.
I will also say that I have seen some porch lifts that can be fairly attractive when people start to use landscaping around them and do it up properly. They can be okay. They can be okay. Better than a ramp that takes up your entire front yard.
That's right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, you can sort of see if you're around $10,000 for the porch lift. If you're around that number probably too, if you're like a 4 foot, 48 foot long ramp or more, um, you're going to save a lot of space. Something you can shield, like you said, with some landscaping and that. So the porch lift again becomes a very good option when you look at houses that are. I use them all the time when I'm in a situation with a bi-level house. So that's where you're often like almost 6 feet above the ground, right, with your main floor.
Right.
And and first of all, I should say with a bi-level, I tell people to move. I go,
I was
just
wondering when you were going to say that.
find the money somehow and just move. Like don't do it. But
Yeah.
people have just been in a situation where for a number of reasons they decide to stay, and it does be you can imagine a ramp trying to go 6 feet vertically. That's you know it's if you have to have a landing every 30 feet, you're at least two landings, so you've got a really long ramp
Right.
for sure. So the economics are definitely play a role in all of this, right? And that's where uh, it's great if you can find a friend or a neighbor, family member that can just build something for you. it can be done very, very economically that way. And that, again, that's why most people do it that way. They just don't have the resources to pay for something that's done sort of properly.
Right.
But wouldn't it be nice if you had no steps at your front door and you never had to worry about a ramp?
I mean, that is the ultimate solution, right?
Yeah.
Let's take a look at this second image here.
So the next couple of images show kind of group home situations. This is one that I was involved with, and we were building in a mature neighborhood. And one of the problems with mature neighborhoods is often the infrastructure below ground isn't very deep. So you don't always have the option to be able to um, sink the house into the ground. So that's why, when I said, it's too bad we don't build with more no step entrances in infill. A lot of times it just becomes a little bit uh, tricky. You have to lower the existing infrastructure, which can cost a lot of money, and our governments aren't interested in helping us out in any way to make that happen. So here's a situation. This is a 10-bedroom group home for adults with disabilities, and we had to add the ramp here. And interestingly enough, what I try to do when this ramp is what we call a switchback ramp. So you can either you get to a point where you can either go straight up the stairs, uh, five steps up to the front door, or you can start to make your way up a ramp, and about halfway you hit a landing and you turn 180 degrees and you go back up towards the entrance. And so what I try to do in these cases is build the first half of the ramp with the 1 in 20 slope, and then we can do away with the handrails. It's a nice gentle slope that most people can negotiate. And when you get to the landing, you have to do some earth landscaping so that you don't have like a big drop off area at the landing. That's really easy to do. Just push some dirt up against the landing, and then your only portion of ramp is the part that goes back up towards the entrance. So you get rid of a lot of the hand railing and give it a bit more of a landscaping feel. Uh, Often that's always what I present in the beginning, but more often than not, clients like to just go with the handrails. For sometimes they feel it's safer. Sometimes they feel they don't want to do that extra, all that what they perceive as extra work. So just it's hard sometimes when I don't have examples to show people of what I'm talking about. They get a little nervous. Trying to visualize what I'm saying, right? So
Right.
this is a nice, I think, a fairly nice group home um, aesthetically, but I would make an argument again. The ramp tends to take away from the aesthetics of the house. So anything we could do to make that ramp less kind of visible would be great. Um, Having said that, the ramp is used by all of the residents who use this group home. So I wouldn't give up the ramp for aesthetics.
Right.
So it's needed, but I'm
So for
always I'm always working on ways to make it look nicer.
for our listeners, I'll label this picture B in our podcast notes.
Okay.
And so the picture that I will label C is on the screen now.
And yeah, so this is another group home. I wasn't involved in this project, but I was able to visit it, and it's a small group of homes in a neighborhood in Edmonton that were built for veterans who are maybe going through some tough times and need some affordable housing. So, uh, in a really great way, they made sure that a couple of their units, dwellings, were made to be accessible as well. So here was a situation where you can see it well for those that can see, I guess there's some construction equipment around, so it's not completely finished, but there is a ramp that goes up to the front door of this would be the accessible suite for a homeowner that or a renter that let's say uses a wheelchair or has a disability. And again, It'd be really nice to be able to have this closer to the ground so that we could eliminate the ramp itself. But these are modular homes that were brought to site, and there's just some logistics with construction detailing and so on that makes it a little bit trickier to make this all work. And yeah, it's always a bit of a tricky thing when we're trying to create something that is affordable, can be built quickly, and still meet our accessibility goals.
Right. Okay, picture D is up on the screen
And
now.
and so this is a wheelchair accessible house that was built in a inner city neighborhood in Edmonton. So again, showing that it can be done. This has a sidewalk that is leading up to the front door. So the house was built low enough to the ground. There's about an I'd say about an 18-inch difference between the main floor and the ground, and from the public sidewalk to the front door allows you to have a sloping sidewalk. So this really isn't a ramp. It's just a sloping sidewalk. Uh, um, if for those that can see, it's obvious that the landscaping isn't finished, so there is a big drop off from each side of the sidewalk. That has since been filled in with earth, and you don't have that situation. But this then becomes a nice way of having that front entrance without any kind of ramp in the front.
So, for those who are listening to the audio version, this is a two-story house, probably older, and there is a sidewalk that goes. The entrance door is right in the middle of the first story on the ground floor, and the sidewalk, the sloped piece that Ron is talking about, goes straight up to that door, and there is a piece of the sidewalk that goes off to the left, presumably around to a side door or the backyard as well, that is not sloped. It's just a regular sidewalk.
Yeah, that's correct. And
Right.
not that it makes a big difference, but this is a brand new house, so
Oh, is it really?
yeah, it's just been designed to look a bit
Older?
a bit more kind of Victorian
Oh,
and
okay.
that sort of traditional look. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
fair enough. And
mhm,
so
yeah.
once this is landscaped, which you say it is now, I'll bet
It
you
is now. Yeah,
nobody would even know that that is an accessible entrance.
correct, correct. That's right. Yeah, and
Bonsai.
that's certainly the ideal, right? That's what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, so picture E is on the sidewalk, or sorry, on the screen now, and this is a bungalow. It looks like a bungalow
Yeah,
with.
this is a bungalow where the homeowners didn't want to get their main floor too close to the ground. They wanted to have a basement that had, and you can't really see it in the front of the house, but in the back, there's it's not a walkout, but it's there's quite a bit of window space in the back of the house. But they did definitely want to have a space for one of their aging parents to come and be able to visit, at least visit the home, and have a main floor uh, flexible bedroom space that they could stay in if they were visiting for any period of time. So this was also a nice solution where we were kind of the reverse of the house we just looked at. The sidewalk just that goes to the front door in the middle of the bungalow is a sidewalk that follows the ground slope and gets to a set of steps, 4 steps that lead to the front door. But another sidewalk, a very gentle slope, it slopes to the side of the house. And as you get to the side of the house, it's hard to see in this photo, but there is a bit of a ramp, so it steepens a bit. There's handrails there, and that leads to a side door that provides you with on-grade no step entrance at the side. So this was a subtle and nice way of making the house accessible within the context that we were building in.
And again, people would not know that this was an accessible entrance. So
Correct. Yeah.
well
Yeah.
done. All
Yeah.
right, last but not least, picture F. Now, this is definitely a newer home in a subdivision.
Yeah. So this is just outside of Edmonton in a neighborhood, St. Albert. This house was actually built probably 20 years ago now. So this was interesting because it really challenged the builder. who was not at all familiar with a lot of the concepts I was talking about. But this was a homeowner that uses a wheelchair, and it's your sort of standard kind of spec home. Um, but we were able to do the driveway and sidewalk with a front car garage. This two-story house has a front door that is back from the garage, so there's a good 40 some feet from the public sidewalk to the front door, which allows us to do a nice gentle sloping concrete pathway that just leads to the door. So this was something that took some doing just to convince the builder that this is doable, and something that we need to make happen. And again, I would make a strong argument that one wouldn't notice that this house is any different than most of the houses on the block. This house doesn't look a lot different than the other houses that are in the neighborhood.
Right. No, it's lovely, and you could have an entire community of houses like that, and nobody would know the difference at all. But people would
Right.
experience the difference if they had mobility devices or if they were moving furniture, which again is something you and I have talked about before. Families with
Yeah.
little toddlers and so forth. I want to
And
return.
it doesn't hurt
It's
to
okay.
point out that in newer neighborhoods, a lot of newer neighborhoods, they have architectural controls that demand that you have at least three steps at the front door.
I know.
So, you can't build a house without steps. And I'd like to know, I mean, I speculate that that's has to do with resale value, and having no steps at the front door somehow reduces your property value. I really don't know how, but certainly the attitude, right? So when we do build a house in a neighborhood like the last photo, typically you have to go to the developer of that subdivision and ask for special requirement or a special relaxation of that specific architectural control. I just this past weekend I was with a friend building in a newer neighborhood in Edmonton, and we talked about that, and he said, "Yeah, we're just gonna put a ramp in our garage because they wouldn't allow us to have it without steps." He actually tried. He said he tried with the developer, and they said, "We won't allow you to do this if you're just speculating that you might be in a wheelchair one day. So if you are in a wheelchair, then we'll probably grant you the relaxation. If you're not, then we won't." Right. So
It's like you have to bring
just
a
kind of says
doctor's note to the builder now.
so it says a lot about that situation. It's really, really kind of bizarre.
Oh my gosh. That's, I mean, we're laughing, but that's pathetic. It's,
It's one of those things. Having said that, I love doing these podcasts. I love talking to you about it. I feel like we're maybe making a bit of a difference, but then I tell a story like that, and I just feel like, well, I haven't made much progress in my 59 years.
but I think that we can educate the public about this. If you're wanting to do renovations on your house, think ahead, which again, we've said
Yeah,
time and time before. Don't think about the trends, don't think about what's hot for you right now. Think about what your life will be like 5 years, 10 years, 40 years down the road. And if you need a doctor's note to give to the builder,
yeah,
then maybe
yeah.
that's what you should do. Can we return just a brief discussion about the house that had the ramp to the side entrance? Because I know that people who consider ramps in the front of their house, particularly the gaudy looking ones that we saw in the picture A, do have security concerns, and that's a legitimate concern for people. I mean, I sort of hold the belief that everybody is entitled to walk through the front door. But if you're going to have a ramp that looks like the ones in picture A did, then maybe security is something that you should put at the top priority instead of further down. What do you think about that?
Uh, yeah, you know what? In my own experience, I have to agree with you. I've had a number of clients who actually aren't totally influenced by the thought that the ramp would look ugly in the front of their house. They're more concerned that the ramp would indicate that there's somebody inside who's vulnerable and kind of easy bait to, like, rob and get in, and so security does become a big issue, for people. Thinking along those lines, it's not something I thought about much, years ago, but clearly that is something that people do legitimately have reason to be concerned about. Um, so, so yeah, there are many instances where I have done we could have done a ramp in the front, but we didn't, and we had to go wrap even all the way to the back of the house, so that right to the back door, if there was no side door there, um, or the side door didn't offer a good way to enter the house. And then a lot of times we try to shield a ramp. So I might build a couple instances I built walls in front of the ramp. And again, this is only when we have the ability to do a short ramp. We can build a kind of almost like a landscape wall in front of the ramp. So it just looks like, if you allow the vegetation to grow up the wall, then it just looks like a hedge or something like that, and you don't even know that it's a ramp there. So there's always ways to kind of work around it, but it's definitely something that's become a concern for a lot of people.
Right. So the front door is an option, side door is an option, back door is an option.
Hmm.
Lift out of the garage into the main floor is an option. So people do have a number of options depending on the type of house that
Yeah,
they live in.
yeah. This is also a good time just to mention, though, that in all of this, in my time working as an architect, the cost to renovate a house has just gone through the roof, so to speak. Um, and there was a time when I do a lot of cost analysis of, is it more cost effective to renovate your house or to build a new one? And if you isolate the accessibility features only, uh, the cost to add all the extra features to, let's say, your typical spec house that's not designed to be accessible at all, and you add all the features that would allow it to be accessible, like the no step entrance, even the extra residential elevator to gain access from one level to another, the bathroom that's got the shower area that without curbs, an accessible kitchen, 3 foot wide doors, all that kind of stuff. If you add all that extra cost to your typical builder's home, that the total cost is still far less than if you bought a house, an existing home, and tried to renovate it. So um, that wasn't always the case. 20 some years ago, renovations were actually um, quite cost effective and the way to go. Now, I would argue that in more cases now, you're better off just tearing your existing house down and starting over than to, or just selling it and moving, than to try to renovate it. It's the cost of labor. So demolition costs are just so much more expensive than they used to be, and cost of materials and so on. So, you can imagine a renovation requires us to sort of tear the house apart and then
Put it back
rebuild
together.
it, right?
Yeah.
So all of this costs a lot of money, and still our governments aren't being very helpful. So there are some small amounts of government funding. There's a program called RAMP, which, essentially, I guess the idea that you could, they would help pay for a ramp, but that I don't know all the details of that program, but you have to meet a certain income level, like a low income level. So if you make more money than a certain amount, then you're not entitled to this grant money. But I still think it's only around $5,000 or something. So these days, that doesn't even get you a ramp, period. So
Right.
you can't rely on government funding to help you. And the only way, again, this is getting a little away, like further away from the ramp issue, but it's still really important, is the government. the government of Canada, at least, has really been pushing hard to get us to build more energy efficient housing, seeing the long term cost savings and all of that for us as a society and overall community, but also individually, we'll all start to save money. I can only argue that that's the same thing when it comes to building houses to be more adaptable and accessible. Is it just is oh it's only going to benefit all of us. It takes a lot of energy to demolish a house and put in new materials. Like if you can make it so that you can just easily adapt, if you just need to add a grab bar, you don't, if you're in a wheelchair and you get hurt, or if you're somebody that gets hurt and then you're in a wheelchair, if you could just move into your house and at least be in the house and live there while you sort of strategize and figure out what you can do um, in the long term, that's that's a tremendous amount of savings that gets you out of the hospital setting and into your home. Like that's just, it just makes economic sense too, right? But the government's just not quite there yet. They just don't see the benefits of that, or maybe they do. They just can't make it work administratively. I'm not sure.
I think in a lot of cases it's a left hand, right hand issue. You know,
Yeah.
one ministry is focused on this and another ministry is focused on that, and you have to bring them all together under the umbrella of
Hmm.
accessibility and make them see the
Hmm.
logic and the cost savings to healthcare and so on. I mean, when you look at the latest statistics on disability that have been released by StatsCan, and you see that over 40% of adults 65 and older claim a disability, and that the most frequently claimed disability is pain related. You know,
Yeah.
people might say, "Oh, it's wheelchair." It's pain related.
Yeah.
It's painful for people to live in their houses. I mean, let's extrapolate that. I know it sounds like I'm connecting dots on things that aren't there, but they are. People are reporting pain issues, and if that's the case, it's pain throughout their whole lives. So let's ease that pain, and if we do it early enough, maybe whatever the pain related issues are would have held off for some time if we didn't make them bend so far to plug something in or reach so high to get something
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
struggle with houses
Hmm.
that just simply don't match who they are and what they
Hmm.
need.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, you're right. And I've just this week, I already, I mean, it's only Tuesday, but um, I was just reading an article yesterday. A lady who's has a visual limitation, and she raised an interesting point where she falls in this funny zone where she's she's legally blind, but she can see enough that doesn't allow her some benefits, some financial benefits. So she wrote this whole article about how, that even what the definition of a disability is and how you can gain access to funding and so on. But one thing she did raise in the article was, she says one characteristic of disability has become nearly universal in Canada, and that's poverty. So so that's a big deal, right? People with disabilities just don't have the money typically, to be able to do a lot of this stuff. So it's sometimes easy for us on the outside to go, oh well, it's $5,000. That's not that much. Well, it is to somebody
Yeah.
who makes $10,000 a year or something, barely surviving, or is on AISH, or So it really is a problem. And I guess for me, one thing that I would try to impress upon people, certainly within my profession of architecture, is you have to do more than just read about it and understand what the codes are saying. You have to really get into the trenches and spend time with people who have disabilities, spend time with the issues. I know it's an investment of your time and energy, but it's the only way to make it work, right? And that's same with government. It's easy to sit back and talk about policy and all that, but spend a day in somebody else's shoes, so to speak, right? In their situation, and well, actually, do more than that. Spend more than a day. I would argue, like, a day just
Yeah.
gives you an inkling of what it's like, but just spend the time. Really, really, really try to appreciate the situation that people are in, and I think that's what makes this whole issue so hard. builders, architects, decision makers, they just don't spend the time doing it. And I don't think it's because they're cold-hearted at all. I think it's because they've got other priorities that are higher on their list of priorities that they need to deal with, right?
I don't think it even
And
enters their
yeah,
thinking.
and maybe it doesn't even enter their thinking, which is kind of sad in a way too. But yeah, I mean, you're probably right. There are some people there that I think once it's raised, I think then people go, wow, that does sound like a problem, but it's somebody else's problem, I guess. So
Right.
it's a tough thing. But I think for myself, like so many others in this world, you just got to keep trying, right? So you just got to keep at it and do what we can to get the word out there.
Right. And the last word on ramps will go to you.
Oh, last word on ramps.
The last word on ramps.
do, do, do everything in your power not to have one or not need
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But when
Yeah,
you do need one,
when you when you do need one, consult an expert. Go to somebody that knows what they're doing. Do some research before you jump into it. And I know that's hard too, because sometimes you don't have that luxury of time to be able to do that. So um, no reason, even if you don't need it right now, not to spend a little bit of time learning more about the issues. Because if it's not you directly affected, I can almost guarantee there's somebody in your life that um, would benefit from your knowledge, whatever knowledge you've gained, right,
right.
on the issue of ramps.
Any questions can certainly be directed here to us, hello@renostudios.com. And if I don't have the resources to answer your question, I will call Ron and see what he has to offer to the situation. But is that fair, Ron?
Sure, yeah,
We
I'm
can do
always
that.
happy to try to field questions for sure.
Okay, perfect. Well, we will wrap up this edition of Real Life Renos, the podcast, and I will thank Ron for joining us and invite all of you to join us again for the next episode of Real Life Renos, the podcast.